7 days, that is all it took to change how some of America's most elite warriors think about special operations. 7 days embedded with the British Special Air Service at their legendary headquarters in Hereford. 7 days that produced reactions, so surprising they were, documented in official after-action reports and discussed at the highest levels of Special Operations Command. When U.S. Navy SEALs, men who have completed the most brutal selection process in the American military, men who have operated in the most dangerous environments on Earth, when these warriors returned from a week of training with the SAS, their reactions shocked everyone. Not because they were humiliated, not because they failed, but because they discovered something about special operations that their own training had never revealed. What they learned in those 7 days contradicted fundamental assumptions built into American special operations doctrine, and their honest assessment of what they experienced has quietly influenced how American Tier 1 units approach certain mission sets ever since. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what those SEALs discovered, why it shocked them, and why their reaction matters for the future of Western special operations. Before I tell you what happened during those 7 days, I need to explain why this exchange program exists and what it was designed to achieve. Because the story starts long before any SEALs set foot in Hereford. American and British Special Operations Forces have maintained exchange programs since the 1960s. These programs are not tourism. They are not diplomatic gestures. They exist because both nations recognize that different military cultures develop different solutions to similar problems. An American operator embedded with British forces will learn techniques and approaches that simply do not exist in American doctrine. A British operator embedded with American forces will gain exposure to resources and methodologies that British units cannot replicate. The exchange of knowledge strengthens both sides. The specific program I am describing involved a 6-man element from a West Coast SEAL team spending 1 week at the SAS headquarters in Hereford, England. The program was designed to expose these operators to SAS selection standards, training methodologies, and operational doctrine. The SEALs were not tourists observing from a distance. They were participants, subjected to the same training activities as SAS candidates and troopers. What they experienced over those 7 days challenged assumptions they did not even know they had. Let me tell you about the men who participated, because understanding their background is essential to understanding why their reactions were so significant. These were not junior operators seeking their first taste of special operations. These were experienced SEALs with multiple combat deployments. Several had over a decade in the teams. They had conducted direct action raids, hostage rescues, reconnaissance operations, and every other mission type in the SEAL repertoire. They had faced enemy fire and emerged victorious. They were, by any measure, among the most experienced special operators in the American military. This experience is precisely what made their reactions so shocking. These were not men easily impressed. They had seen and done things that would be inconceivable to most humans. They had trained at the finest facilities in the world with virtually unlimited resources. They had access to technology and equipment that other nations can only dream of. When men of this caliber express genuine surprise at what they encounter, that surprise means something. Day 1 began at 0400 hours. The SEALs were collected from their accommodations and transported to the SAS training area known as the Killing House. This facility, purpose-built for close quarters battle training, has been the crucible in which SAS hostage rescue capability has been forged for decades. The SEALs had their own close quarters training facilities. They considered themselves among the best in the world at room clearance and hostage rescue. They were about to discover a different perspective. The first shock came before any training commenced. The SAS instructors asked each SEAL to demonstrate their standard room entry technique. The SEALs executed their drills flawlessly. Their movement was aggressive, their target acquisition was rapid, and their coordination was excellent. The SAS instructors watched without comment. Then they demonstrated the SAS approach. The difference was immediately apparent. Where the SEALs emphasized speed and violence of action, the SAS emphasized something the lead instructor called controlled aggression. The movements were not slower in any way that would compromise tactical effectiveness, but they were more deliberate. Each step had purpose. Each angle was covered with precision rather than simply speed. The target discrimination was fractionally longer but demonstrably more accurate. One SEAL later described the difference this way: "We were trained to overwhelm the room. They were trained to own the room." The distinction sounds semantic until you watch both approaches side by side. Overwhelming a room means flooding it with operators and firepower so fast that threats cannot respond. Owning a room means entering with such complete situational awareness that every variable is accounted for before engagement decisions are made. Both approaches work, but they work differently, and one approach produces fewer collateral casualties in complex hostage environments. The SEALs spent 8 hours in the Killing House on day 1. By the end, their understanding of close quarters battle had fundamentally shifted. They were not converting to SAS doctrine. They were expanding their doctrinal vocabulary. They now understood that their approach, excellent as it was, represented one solution among several. The SAS approach represented a different solution, optimized for different priorities. Both had value. Neither was complete without understanding the other. Day 2 introduced the SEALs to what the SAS calls tactical patience. This concept would prove to be the most challenging aspect of the entire week for the American operators. American special operations culture emphasizes initiative, aggression, and forward momentum. When you identify a problem, you solve it. When you see an opportunity, you exploit it. This mindset has produced extraordinary results across decades of operations. But it also has limitations that become apparent in certain scenario types. The training exercise involved a simulated surveillance operation against a target compound. The SEALs were tasked with gathering intelligence on the compound's layout, security patterns, and occupancy over an extended period. The SAS instructors specified a 48-hour observation window before any action could be considered. The SEALs found this constraint almost physically uncomfortable. Their training emphasized action. Observation was a precursor to action, not an end in itself. Spending 48 hours watching a target when you could be planning an assault felt inefficient, even wasteful. They expressed this frustration to the SAS instructors. The response they received reframed their entire understanding of special operations. One SAS Sergeant Major, a veteran of operations in Northern Ireland, Iraq, and Afghanistan, explained the doctrine this way. The operation does not begin when you breach the door. The operation begins when you first observe the target. Everything you learn during observation makes the assault more effective. Every pattern you identify, every routine you document, every variable you account for, these are not delays to the operation. These are the operation. The SEALs pushed back. What about time-sensitive targets? What about situations where delay costs lives? The SAS response was nuanced. In time-sensitive scenarios, you compress the observation phase. You do not eliminate it. Even 60 minutes of observation can reveal patterns that save lives during the assault. The American tendency to proceed from intelligence to action with minimal observation between them sometimes produces unnecessary complications during execution. This concept of tactical patience was not presented as superior to the American approach. It was presented as complementary. There are scenarios where American aggression and speed are optimal. There are scenarios where British patience and observation are optimal. The elite operator understands both approaches and selects the appropriate one based on scenario requirements. An operator who only knows one approach is limited in ways they may not recognize until that limitation costs lives. By the end of Day 2, the SEALs were beginning to understand why this exchange program existed. They were not learning that their training was inadequate. They were learning that their training was incomplete. The SAS was filling gaps they had not known existed. Day 3 focused on escape and evasion. The SEALs participated in an abbreviated version of the SAS selection exercise known as tactical questioning resistance. This training is designed to prepare operators for capture and interrogation by hostile forces. The SEALs had their own resistance training. They had completed SEER school. They considered themselves prepared for this contingency. The SAS approach differed in ways that initially confused the American operators. Where American resistance training emphasized psychological preparation and authorized disclosure limits, SAS training emphasized something more subtle. The SAS instructors called it greyman doctrine. The goal was not simply to resist interrogation, but to become so unremarkable that interrogators lost interest. To project nothing worth extracting. To become invisible even while visible. This greyman concept extended beyond interrogation resistance. It was a philosophy that permeated SAS operations. In surveillance operations, blend with the environment so completely that observers do not register your presence. In social environments, become so unremarkable that you leave no impression. In hostile territory, project nothing that attracts attention. This was not about disguise or deception in the traditional sense. It was about the deliberate suppression of presence. The SEALs found this approach challenging because it contradicted elements of their own training culture. SEAL training produces men of exceptional confidence who project competence and capability. These are valuable traits in many contexts, but they are liabilities in contexts requiring genuine invisibility. An operator who cannot suppress his own presence cannot conduct certain types of operations regardless of his other capabilities. One SEAL described the experience this way. They taught us that sometimes the most dangerous thing in an operation is your own ego. Not in a soft way, in a tactical way. Your ego makes you visible. Visibility gets you killed. The lesson was uncomfortable because it challenged something the SEALs valued about themselves, but it was tactically valid, and they recognized its validity even as they struggled with its implications. If you are finding this analysis valuable and want to understand more about how different elite forces approach training, subscribe right now. I release detailed breakdowns like this every week, and next week I am covering why certain NATO special operations units have developed completely different physical fitness standards and the surprising results when these standards were tested against each other. But right now, let me tell you what happened on day 4, because this is where the exchange became genuinely transformational. Day 4 introduced the SEALs to what the SAS calls the Unacceptable Option Protocol. This training was unlike anything in the American Special Operations curriculum. It was designed to prepare operators for scenarios where all available options were bad, and the requirement was to select the least bad option under extreme time pressure. The training scenario presented a hostage situation with no clean solution. Assault would result in hostage casualties. Negotiation had failed. The hostage takers had demonstrated willingness to execute. Time was running out. Every option the SEALs proposed was analyzed and its negative consequences were detailed. There was no good answer. There was only the requirement to act, despite the absence of a good answer. American military doctrine generally emphasizes finding the right answer. Mission planning works backward from desired end state through necessary actions to current position. This methodology assumes that a right answer exists and can be identified through proper analysis. The SAS training challenged this assumption directly. Sometimes there is no right answer, the SAS instructor explained. Sometimes every option is wrong. The professional operator executes anyway. He selects the least wrong option and owns the consequences. Paralysis is not an option. Waiting for a right answer that does not exist is not an option. You act knowing that the outcome will be imperfect, and you accept responsibility for that imperfection. This philosophical approach to decision-making under uncertainty was deeply challenging for the SEALs. Their training had prepared them to find solutions. This training was preparing them for scenarios where solutions did not exist. The psychological burden of knowingly selecting a bad option was different from the burden of attempting a good option that happened to fail. Both produced negative outcomes. Only one produced premeditated acceptance of those negative outcomes. The SEALs debated this concept extensively among themselves during the evening of day 4. Some found it fatalistic. Others found it realistic. All found it uncomfortable. But as they discussed scenarios from their own operational experience, they began recognizing situations where this framework would have been valuable. Situations where they had hesitated, seeking a better option that did not exist. Situations where that hesitation had cost time that could not be recovered. The honest assessment from one senior SEAL was stark. We trained to find the answer. They trained to live without one. Both are necessary. We had one. They gave us the other. Day 5 shifted focus to long-range reconnaissance patrol methodology. The SEALs were briefed on extended duration operations lasting weeks rather than days. The logistical, psychological, and tactical considerations for such operations were dramatically different from anything in standard SEAL mission profiles. American special operations typically depend on robust logistics chains. Resupply is available. Extraction is available. Medical support is available. These dependencies enable certain capabilities but create certain limitations. When support is available, you can operate at higher tempo with more aggressive consumption of resources. When support is not available, you must adapt to a completely different operational rhythm. The SAS long-range patrol doctrine assumed no support. Every element of the operation had to be self-sufficient for the entire duration. This assumption produced techniques and approaches that were foreign to American practice. Water procurement, food procurement, medical self-treatment, equipment, field repair, navigation without electronic aids, communication without satellite support. Each of these capabilities existed in SEAL training at some level. None existed at the level required for weeks-long unsupported operations. The SEALs were particularly struck by the SAS approach to physical conditioning for extended operations. American Special Operations fitness emphasizes peak performance for high-intensity, short-duration activities. Assault fitness, combat fitness, the ability to perform at maximum output for hours when the mission requires it. This fitness model is appropriate for the typical American Special Operations mission profile. The SAS fitness model included this capability but added something else. Endurance fitness for sustained output over weeks. The ability to cover ground day after day while carrying heavy loads and maintaining tactical effectiveness. This was not about peak performance. This was about sustainable performance over durations that American operators rarely trained for. One SEAL later reported that he had never felt undertrained until he attempted to match SAS marching pace over multiple consecutive days. He was one of the fittest men in the American military, but his fitness was optimized for a different type of performance. The SAS operators were not stronger or faster. They were more durable. They could maintain moderate output indefinitely. This capability did not exist in American doctrine at the same level. Day 6 focused on joint terminal attack controller procedures and close air support coordination. This was an area where the SEALs expected to learn relatively little. American close air support capabilities exceed those of any other nation. American ordnance options, delivery platforms, and targeting technology are unmatched. The SEALs anticipated demonstrating American capability rather than learning from British practice. What they encountered surprised them. The SAS approach to close air support emphasized minimal ordnance for maximum effect. Where American doctrine often brought overwhelming firepower, British doctrine sought the minimum necessary to achieve the tactical objective. This parsimony was not about capability limitation, it was about operational philosophy. The SAS instructor explained, "Every round you fire announces your position. Every bomb you drop creates collateral damage potential. Every excessive engagement complicates your exfiltration. You want enough firepower to succeed and not a single round more. Restraint is a tactical advantage, not a limitation." This concept of minimal sufficient force was consistent with themes throughout the week. The SAS prioritized precision over volume in virtually every domain. Precise movement, precise observation, precise engagement, precise fire support. The philosophy was coherent across all mission types. It produced different capabilities than the American philosophy of maximum available force. Neither was universally superior. Both had optimal application domains. The SEALs found themselves respecting the coherence of SAS doctrine even when they questioned specific applications. The British approach was not random. It was systematically developed from a specific operational philosophy, applied consistently across all domains. The American approach was equally systematic, but derived from different philosophical premises. Understanding both philosophies enabled selection of appropriate approaches for specific scenarios. Day 7 was the final day. The SEALs participated in a combined exercise integrating all the training themes from the previous 6 days. The scenario required surveillance, patient observation, precision assault, casualty extraction, and extended evasion. It tested every concept they had encountered during the week. The results were instructive. The SEALs performed well in areas aligned with their existing training. They struggled in areas where the week's training had introduced new concepts. This was expected. 7 days could not produce mastery of skills that SAS operators developed over years. What 7 days could produce was awareness. The SEALs now knew what they did not know. That awareness was itself invaluable. The debrief following the exercise lasted for hours. SAS instructors provided detailed feedback on SEAL performance. The feedback was direct, specific, and actionable. Areas of excellence were acknowledged. Areas requiring development were identified without softening. The SEALs, accustomed to direct feedback in their own culture, appreciated the honesty. What shocked observers was not the content of the debrief but the SEAL responses. These experienced operators, men with decades of combined special operations experience, expressed genuine gratitude for having their assumptions challenged. They acknowledged gaps in their training they had not known existed. They committed to integrating lessons learned into their own practice. They recommended expanding the exchange program to include more SEAL elements. This humility was not typical warrior posturing. It was not diplomatic courtesy. It was honest professional assessment. The SEALs had encountered a peer organization with different capabilities and had learned from that encounter. Their willingness to learn was itself remarkable given their experience level and the excellence of their existing training. The after-action report from this exchange was unusual in its candor. The senior SEAL documented specific doctrinal gaps the week had revealed. He recommended curriculum modifications for SEAL training based on SAS practices. He proposed expanded exchange programs with longer duration and more participants. His assessment was not that American training was inferior, but that it was incomplete. The SAS had capabilities that complemented American capabilities. Integration of both produced more complete operators than either alone. This report circulated through Special Operations Command and influenced subsequent training development. The specific changes implemented remain classified, but the direction is known. American Special Operations has increased emphasis on patience-intensive operations. Surveillance duration requirements have extended in certain training pipelines. Escape and evasion training has incorporated greyman concepts. Long-range reconnaissance patrol capabilities have received additional investment. Close air support doctrine has been reviewed for parsimony principles. None of these changes represent abandonment of American Special Operations philosophy. American units retain their emphasis on speed, aggression, and overwhelming capability. These remain core strengths. But American units now also have expanded capability in areas where British doctrine excels. The exchange program produced exactly the knowledge transfer it was designed to produce. Let me tell you why this story matters beyond military interest. The willingness of elite operators to acknowledge limitations and learn from peers represents a model applicable far beyond special operations. These men had every reason to believe they had nothing to learn. They had proven themselves in the most demanding selection process in the American military. They had succeeded in operations where failure meant death. They had access to resources and training unmatched anywhere on Earth. Despite all this, they approached the exchange with genuine openness. They did not dismiss different approaches as inferior simply because they were different. They did not defend their existing training against all critique simply because it was theirs. They evaluated SAS methods on merit and integrated valuable elements into their own practice. This humility is not weakness. It is the foundation of continuous improvement. Units that believe they have nothing to learn stagnate. Units that actively seek knowledge from every available source improve continuously. The SEALs, who participated in this exchange, improved not because they were deficient but because improvement is always possible for those who seek it. The SAS also learned from this exchange. American operators brought perspectives and capabilities that enriched British practice. The exchange was genuinely bilateral, even though this video focuses on the SEAL experience. British operators who trained with American units brought lessons back to Hereford that influenced SAS doctrine. The learning flowed in both directions because both organizations valued learning over pride. This is what makes the NATO alliance genuinely powerful. Not just combined military capability, but combined military knowledge. When American and British special operators share doctrine, both nations gain capabilities they could not develop alone. When German, French, Polish, Norwegian, Canadian, Dutch, and other allied operators join this exchange, the entire alliance grows stronger. The competition between allies is not about superiority. It is about contribution. Each nation contributes unique capabilities forged by unique history and geography. The combined capability exceeds what any nation could develop independently. The reactions that shocked everyone were not expressions of defeat. They were expressions of professional growth. When experienced operators acknowledge that they learned something significant, that acknowledgement represents confidence, not weakness. Only the insecure refuse to admit they have learned. The confident acknowledge learning because learning is the path to excellence. Consider what the alternative would have been. The SEALs could have completed the week and returned with defensive assessments, dismissing SAS methods as inferior or irrelevant. They could have protected their egos by denying the value of what they encountered. They could have written after-action reports emphasizing American strengths rather than integrated lessons. This alternative would have been professionally irresponsible, but it would have been emotionally easier. Instead, they chose honesty. They documented their own limitations. They recommended changes to their own training. They acknowledged that a different organization had capabilities they lacked. This honesty made them better operators and made American special operations more capable. The short-term discomfort of acknowledged limitation produced long-term improvement in actual capability. This is the culture that produces genuine excellence. The lessons they brought back influenced colleagues who had not participated. The ripple effects extended through the special operations community. 7 days of training produced years of improved capability because the participants approached the experience with professional humility. I want to leave you with a thought about what this exchange reveals about elite performance. The SEALs who traveled to Hereford were already elite. They did not become elite by training with the SAS. They became more complete by training with the SAS. The distinction matters. Elite status is not a destination achieved and then defended. Elite status is a process of continuous development that never concludes. The SEALs understood this. Their willingness to learn from peers reflected their understanding that excellence is dynamic, not static. Their willingness to share doctrine with allies, to invest training resources in foreign operators, reflected their understanding that allied excellence strengthens British security. Hoarding knowledge serves no one in an alliance. Sharing knowledge makes the entire alliance more capable. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Next week, I am releasing an analysis of why physical fitness standards vary so dramatically between NATO special operations units and what happened when those differences were tested in a combined exercise. The results challenge assumptions about what fitness actually means for military effectiveness. The week after that, I am examining a training exchange that produced even more dramatic reactions than the one I covered today. Drop your comments below. Tell me which special operations training comparison you want to see next. I read every comment, and your suggestions directly influence which topics I cover. If you learned something from this analysis, share it with someone who appreciates understanding how special operations actually develops. Not the movie version with perfect warriors who never grow, but the real version with professionals who never stop developing. Remember that the most dangerous operator is not the one who knows everything. No one knows everything. The most dangerous operator is the one who knows what he does not know and actively addresses those gaps. The SEALs who trained with the SAS learned what they did not know. That knowledge made them more dangerous, not less. That is what shocked everyone. Not that American operators had limitations. Every organization has limitations. What shocked everyone was the professional maturity to acknowledge those limitations and address them through learning. That maturity is rarer than physical courage. That maturity is rarer than tactical skill. That maturity is what separates units that remain excellent from units that stagnate after initial success. The SEALs demonstrated that maturity during those 7 days in Hereford. They returned to America as better operators serving a more capable special operations community. That is what exchange programs are designed to produce. That is what professional military education looks like at the highest levels. Until next time, remember that the best never stop learning because the best understand that learning is what made them the best. Complacency is the enemy of excellence. Humility is its foundation. The SEALs who trained with the SAS embodied that principle, and their example remains relevant for anyone seeking genuine excellence in any field.